For my friends who like to have a lot more input, a lot more data, who like to take their time in making decisions, you're going to feel really uncomfortable right now. And this is your opportunity to learn and grow and frankly, get over it, because we have to make fast decisions to keep our businesses nimble and flexible and our teams ready to go right now. Hey there, friend. It's Stefanie Krievins, your host of the Hot Mess Hotline, where mid-level leaders learn to think like entrepreneurs. In today's conversation, we're going to cover 3 fundamental tools you need now to better understand the volatility and complexity and emotional roller coaster that you're seeing from your people and in your business. This is the first official episode of the Hot Mess Hotline. Happy dance time! You can't see it, but I'm doing a happy dance because I'm so excited that you're here to up your game when it comes to change. Here's my promise to you. After you've listened to all 6 episodes, you're going to become an even more effective leader who knows how to make the right kind of change happen and stay nimble as the business impacts of COVID-19 continue to unroll throughout the rest of 2020 and 2021. But here's the deal. I can only do my part. The action taking is on you. I promise to be an awesome teacher if you promise to be an awesome student and take what you learn and what the experts say is the best practice and make it the right practice for you and your team and your business. We're recording this season of the podcast in late May 2020. It will be released into the world in June 2020. And I believe that you need this information now more than ever. This global pandemic has created massive change in a short amount of time. And during this season, I'm going to provide the leadership and management tools that you can implement right after you're done listening to a podcast episode so that you and your team can learn the awesome lessons from this hard time so that you can emerge even more resilient and focused so that you can learn to guide change even when there isn't a global pandemic that forces your hand to change rapidly. Starting in episode 2, we're going to dig into the 8 steps you need to take to lead and guide change, pulling from the experts in change management. Right now, you need these tools to make sure that you can do great things, to make sure that the hard lessons that come from this time stick and that your business weaknesses get fixed. Let's dig in, my friend. If you're wondering what a hot mess is, the appropriate business jargony term is VUCA. VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. Raise your hand if you're feeling any of that right now, wherever you're listening, right? Volatile. Things are just a roller coaster. Your emotions are a roller coaster. Your business results are a roller coaster. Your team's emotions are a roller coaster. There's uncertainty. We don't know what the future holds. We don't know if this recession is going to be L-shaped, V-shaped, some other shape. I don't even know, right? We don't know what the future holds. It's complex. There's so many different layers of information that we have to take into account now that we didn't before, and we may not know exactly what to do with that. And then ambiguity. Because of the uncertainty, things just look fuzzy, right? Is the way that we've been managing our business in the past, is that how we need to manage our business in the future? Were the results that were so important in fourth quarter of 2019 now the most important results that we need to measure now in second quarter 2020? It's probably all been upended for you, my friend. I think ultimately what this situation is doing right now is revealing the strengths of our organization and revealing the weaknesses. It's highlighted and amplified what's made you awesome, what's made your organization unique, what's made it strong. It's also highlighting the processes, the results, the people, the business products that were your weak links. And it's probably feeling really painful to have to acknowledge that. You know, what I want to share with you in this first segment of the podcast is I want to talk about ways to frame this economic and health disaster so that you can better understand it. And before we dig into that, I want to share with you a client story of a group that I've had the great privilege of working with, because I think that the way that they've adapted to this situation is not only honorable and focused on their team first and focused on making sure that they emerge from this situation with a sustainable business, but I really admire how through our work together and through just the situations of this global pandemic, they've used this as an opportunity to look themselves in the mirror and realize what's really working well and what needs to change for the long-term health of their business. I started working with this company in fourth quarter 2019, and we hit it off from the bat. They're just great people. They're mission focused. They care about having a business that is financially successful because their people are successful. And that's different than just being focused on a business that's financially successful. They care deeply about their people. And at one point, I had to coach multiple vice presidents as they were getting ready to go into a furlough at the very start of this global pandemic. And they're crying and I'm crying. And, I'm asking them questions to remind them of the compassionate leader that they want to be in this moment. And I really took that to heart. And it really meant the world to me that they just cared so much. They cared so much. And I think times like this reveal your bosses, your teams, level of empathy for those around you and what they're dealing with. And so back to the company part of this story that I wanted to share with you. These folks, when we first started working together, the reason they brought me in is that they were moving too quickly. They were almost victims of their own success. They had implemented multiple new projects in 1 year. They had tried to implement multiple new technologies to up their game in 1 year. So they had lots of awesome ideas, lots of awesome projects at 70% that needed to be at 100% for them to really be successful. So what they were able to do as the pandemic was hitting was leverage the capital that they did have, make really smart decisions proactively. They knew that their industry was going to be hit hard. And so they made the tough decision to furlough and lay off people so that they could store their cash to see this out in the long term and then hopefully bring those furloughed employees back at the right time when their industry started to pick up more steam. And by all accounts, they've done an amazing job. What they've also done with this forced slowdown was take those technologies that they were trying to implement and get them up to 100%. Take those projects and workflows that they needed to redesign and get them to 100%. They were able to reinvest in their facility because there were less people there. They could upgrade their facility. They were able to strengthen their HR processes, bring in more technology to support their growing company where, 3 years ago, I think they were at 35 employees, and just before the furlough, they were close to 70. So they had grown pretty rapidly, but their HR structure hadn't in the process. So I have just admired them for not only staying nimble, staying empathetic and trying to put as many people first as possible, but also using this time to get back to what was really important to them, to get back to the heart of their business, to shore up the foundation. And they even brought in some lean processes, which were super cool. And it's really fun to coach around, but to bring in some lean processes so that when they get their people back, they can be even more creative because they have structured time to make things better. And I just admire the heck out of the way they've embraced this really crappy situation as a way to strengthen their business, strengthen the team that really has led the company through this situation. And as soon as the economy reopens, they're going to come barreling out of those doors ready to go. So I invite you to think about, how are you getting ready for the next phase? How are you strengthening your team now? Regardless of what phase we're in terms of disaster recovery, what are you doing today to strengthen your people and your organization for tomorrow? This COVID-19 situation, I liken it to a slow-moving hurricane that is slowly making landfall, and the bands of the hurricane are just moving slowly over land and just flooding and flooding and flooding and just wreaking havoc. And it's not only flooding, it's tearing apart buildings, it's tearing apart lives. I mean, it's just a disaster. And so we're finally moving into a phase where we can start to see some sunshine again. And let me break down for you the 4 phases of disaster recovery. So here's what happens as a hurricane is making landfall. The Red Cross and other disaster response organizations are making their way toward the disaster area. So if you remember Hurricane Katrina in 2005, as Hurricane Katrina is making landfall and passing over the United States and eventually dissipating, the Red Cross and other amazing disaster recovery organizations are driving towards the Gulf Coast, driving towards Mississippi, New Orleans, Biloxi, Waveland, all these little towns that were impacted. And so as soon as the hurricane clears, we move into what's called disaster recovery. This is actually phase 3 of disaster response planning. And so this is the immediate aftermath of what happens when a disaster strikes. Fire, tornado, hurricane, COVID-19. It's all about making short-term decisions in order to make sure that we save as many people's lives or jobs in this case as possible. In mid-March, we had days to get everyone to work from home to keep our people safe. We were trying to figure out what our customers needed, what we could get from our suppliers, what we needed to do with our marketing dollars, et cetera, et cetera. We were making very short-term decisions because we didn't know what the next day or next week even held for us. And so this is all about saving lives, saving jobs, saving dollars, crisis response, crisis decision making. And we are now moving into, and really, by the time this podcast drops in June, we'll be moving into phase 4, which is disaster recovery. This is the rebuilding. This is creating sustainability. So this is the piece of the process that I used to play when I worked for Catholic Charities. Catholic Charities has the long-term, or they used to, I don't know if it's true anymore, but they had the long-term federal disaster recovery grant to help rebuild communities after the Red Cross would leave a community. So Hurricane Katrina, the Red Cross is there 2 to 6 weeks, depending on the community and what they needed to stabilize, to find bodies, to get people to hospitals, to make sure that structures that were on the verge of falling down got torn down, et cetera, right? So this, the saving lives piece is the crisis. So disaster recovery is, how do we rebuild homes? How do we rebuild the economy? How do we get businesses back? This is what we're moving into and will remain in for at least a year, if not 18 months or 2 years, which is recovery, rebuilding, figuring out what this quote unquote new normal is. And I always say quote unquote new normal because I hate those words. I don't really know what they mean, but I don't have a better option. But recovery is, okay, what does the landscape look like now that we can't get these suppliers from supplier A and we only have B and C to choose from because they had their advantages and now we have other options that we have to make or other decisions. Disaster recovery means, how do we take the lessons learned during disaster response and make sure we fix the systems that broke when everything was in crisis? How do we take the business lessons that we learned from this emergency crisis situation and make sure we never have to face that again because we're better prepared next time? So that's phase 4. So think about in your business, what needs to be rebuilt? What needs to be put back together in a new way? How is your landscape different? Are there suppliers missing? Are there whole teams and employees and groups of employees missing because of a furlough or even a layoff, right? These are just we have to make new decisions in a new context. And here's what I think this is asking of us now is to remain nimble. If you're not using the 90-day sprint tool, I'd really encourage you to use that. This is a great way to stay nimble, yet also stay focused on your goals at the same time. So in disaster recovery, we can make longer-term decisions. The further along we go, we can also make decisions 6 months out, 9 months out. But right now, you're probably focusing on that 90-day sprint. Use that 90-day sprint tool. If you don't have the 90-day sprint tool that you already use and love, in the show notes, there's going to be a link to the actual blog post for this episode, and there you can download the 90-day sprint tool with some quick instructions so you can start using it right away. But this 90-day sprint tool allows us to focus on short-term day-to-day actions, how they align with the 90-day goal, and then connect that 90-day goal out to another 90 days. It's really hard in disaster recovery to focus on a year out, 18 months out, because just too many variables change on a week-by-week basis. Hopefully, there's not so much turnover in your information that things are changing by the day at this point. It's probably every week or 2 weeks. So that 90-day sprint tool is a great way to help you contain your decision making and yet still move forward. Here's the mindset that I think you need during disaster recovery is that as a leader, you still have to make decisions in the face of uncertainty. Just acknowledge that you're not going to have all the information, but you still have to move forward. And you still have to move forward even though you realize there's a lot more that is not within your control than you ever thought possible. And so the reality is that you still have to make plans for next week, the week after, with better visibility into the fact that, oh, I can't really control if that customer sticks with us or not. I can do my best. We can, try to negotiate, but whether they stay or leave, there's a lot of factors on that person's plate that dictates whether or not they can stay with us as a customer. Know that a fast decision doesn't necessarily mean it's a rash decision. So the other mindset that I think you need during disaster recovery is to know that every experience is a learning opportunity. Because we're stressed out, because we're operating on adrenaline, because we're making fast decisions, we're going to make more mistakes than normal. That's okay. Use every experience as a learning opportunity so next time is better. And make sure, too, that you're focusing resources on the most important work. Stressful times like this, crisis times, require us to focus on what is the most important because it creates clarity. It creates clarity on what is absolutely vital to our business and what a lot of what we thought was so important is probably just noise. And those meetings that you used to attend that seemed so important really don't seem important anymore. As a leader, you need to make sure you're communicating with consistency and more frequently than you're probably comfortable or used to. That doesn't mean constant communication. That means there's a cadence and a consistency to your communication. And don't make it all sunshine and rainbows. Be honest with people about what's really happening, what is known, what is unknown, what is good news, what is not so great news, and make sure you're doing it at similar times during the week so that people can come to expect when they're going to get that information from you. It really does create a sense of safety to help them trust you more as a leader. And just know as we're moving along this pace, having to make really fast decisions, you're going to frustrate people. You're going to piss them off. And this is just how it goes. But a leader knows how to stand up for what's right and do what is necessary in the moment. And so folks around you are going to get frustrated. This is a really great time for you to grow maybe a little thicker skin to realize what's really important and how you need to lead your people through this situation. And of course, with any business environment, but especially during a global pandemic, give each other grace. We are human beings. In some ways, we're not built for this stressful kind of situation, right? We're not built for all the changes that had to come down so quickly. But on the flip side, and here's the opportunity and the thing that gives me the goosebumps, is that we are built for this. We are stronger and more resilient than we ever think possible. And situations like this have the possibility of bringing out the best in us and the best in our company. So while we need to give each other grace to be human, to be stressed out, to take a break, to have maybe an extra nap during the day or one nap during the day, this is also an opportunity and almost a call to arms, my friends, to say, guys, we can do this. We can get through this. We can make this happen. So step one, so as we transition out of step 4, which will be not for another year, 18 months, 2 years, we're actually going to move back into the mitigation phase. So this is where you create your plans, you make sure you have the right insurance in place, and we all know there's probably new insurance products coming down the line or significant changes in insurance that will happen because of this situation. But the mitigation phase is actually phase 1, and that is where You look at your business continuity plans, you reevaluate your IT infrastructure to make sure it's equipped for what could happen again, because this isn't the last time a global pandemic's going to impact business in this way. I wish I had better news for you, but this is just the truth. And so how can you use what you're learning right now and be better prepared right now or for the next time? And so what you need to be doing during disaster recovery is fixing what you can, prioritizing that, but also take what you're learning, realizing what's broken in your disaster preparedness, and move it into phase one when the time is right. You'll know when it's right in your business to tackle that. But phase one is the mitigation step. Phase two is the practicing of it, or the preparedness is the official language there. But that's where you practice your plans. That's where you have everybody work from home on a random Tuesday to stress test your IT. That's where you make sure you're checking in with your insurance provider or doing an audit of your disaster preparedness at least once a year. Those are active shooter drills, because that's, another disaster that could happen. The tornado drills, that's what step two is. Step two is practicing what you planned for in step one, so that when phase three comes again, disaster response, you'll be better prepared. And this is all in, let me say it this way. Phases 1 and 2, mitigation and preparedness, integrate those into your strategic planning, because that's just a different mindset that happens when we can be in strategic planning mode, when we can plan 3 years out, because we have more control over the future, or at least we believe we do at that point. But there's more stability in the economy, so we can control more about our business future. We have better insight into our stakeholders and their behaviors, because they're not also operating from a crisis response. In any 10-year business cycle, there's going to be, from the research that I've done, there's going to be about 6 good years, 2 great years, and 2 really bad, sucky years. Okay, so let's plan for that in our strategic plan. Of course, we don't know when the good, great, and bad years are going to hit in any 10-year cycle, but we know that they are. So is that reflected in your cash flow and in your business savings accounts? Is that reflected in your hiring and termination and succession planning? We know this is going to happen. And for my friends who are older Gen X or younger baby boomer, you've been through something like this multiple times. 9/11, the dot-com boom, coming of age during the oil crisis. You've been through this. And so this isn't as significant to you in a business cycle as it is to, say, a millennial leader, because my older Gen Xers, younger baby boomers, you have more emotional resiliency than most other leaders, because you've been around the block. And this is a good thing. We need to learn from your level of stress management and business decision making, because you've been there, done that, and you can teach us a lot. When we're back into phase 1 and 2, which is mitigation and preparedness, we will again move into a time where communication can happen at a slightly slower pace. It still should remain consistent, leader, but it can happen at a slightly slower pace. We can take the time to get people engaged into decisions and get people on board with our change initiatives. But it's a different decision-making and communication cycle when we're back in strategic planning mode than when we're in disaster recovery mode. And the other one that I want to caution you about, I pulled this from my research, and I just love this business cliche, if you will. But one of the things that we tend to do is we think trees grow into the sky, which means that all patterns and trends last a lot longer than they actually do. And so I actually had a client say to me before, when you're losing, the losing never lasts. And when you're winning, the winning never lasts, right? There's a cycle to all of this. And just recognize that while we're in phase 4, which is recovery, which is rebuilding and creating sustainability, this too shall pass. And we will once again move into mitigation and recovery. But I need you to stay on guard, leader, and remember that once we get back into some level of stability and success again, phase 3 and 4 will hit yet again. This season of the Hot Mess Hotline is brought to you by my Change Management Crash Course. This program is for the busy mid-level leader who needs to pivot out of this COVID-19 hot mess by creating new business results with an even stronger team. Go to changecrashcourse.com. Don't wait to become the pro troublemaker you've always wanted to be. In the first part of this episode, we covered two really important tools for you to know. One is the 90-day sprint, which is a management tool that you can use right now to plan with some level of flexibility into the future. And then the second one is the 4 phases of disaster preparedness and response, and how you as a leader need to communicate and what kind of mindset you need to have to be successful in each of those. So if you want even more straightforward leadership tools, go to the show notes and click on the link to get weekly tips from me, get that 90-day sprint, and then you will be in the know for how mid-level leaders think like entrepreneurs. So let's dig into this second section. Here's what I want to share with you, and it's called the change curve. And this is going to explain a lot about the emotional reactivity that you're experiencing, maybe with yourself, with your team, with your boss. Right? You might feel like every day is kind of hit or miss as to where people are at with their stress level. And that's because the change curve is like this wild emotional roller coaster that we go on anytime we're presented with change. And some of us move through it more quickly than others. And some of us kind of bounce around on it. It's not exactly linear, but here are the 6 phases that I want to walk you through. So boom, change happens. We'll call it mid-March. You've got 48 hours to get your team working from home. First step on that change curve is denial. People are trying to hold on desperately to the status quo, to what was. Oh, we'll be back in the office next week. Oh, don't worry about it. We'll get this figured out as soon as possible, and we'll be back to the new normal in less than a month. But they're trying to hold on to what was. They're probably living in the past a little bit. They're probably shocked and they need more information from you. The next phase is frustration. So they're going to blame themselves. They're going to blame people around them. They're going to blame anybody that will take it because they're just frustrated. They're probably angry. They're afraid. They don't know where they're headed. This is where that uncertainty really starts to bother people. The third phase is depression. Some models will label this as confusion. So you will notice with your folks, either they're really, like their energy is really, really low, so their work product is fairly low, or all of a sudden they are just so confused about everything going on around them. I don't understand why this process is, and I'm so confused how to use this Zoom all of a sudden. I've never had to use Zoom. Meanwhile, you're thinking, we've been using Zoom for 3 years. Why is this so hard all of a sudden? And it's because their patterns and their habits have been disrupted so much that their brain is just working on overdrive, and they are just cornfused, just straight up confused, right? And so what they need from you is an empathetic ear, not sympathy, my friends. Do not get in there and wallow around with them and acknowledge that it's okay to stay afraid and it's okay to live in denial of what's going on. Now, let me caveat that. It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be afraid during a global pandemic. What is not okay is that we stay paralyzed because of that fear. As I said in the first section of this podcast, we were made for this. This is our time to shine, our time to be strong and rise up and figure out this hot mess. So our team needs help getting past the frustration, the confusion, the depression. So the third, fourth, and fifth phases of this change curve is one, you're going to see them when they're ready to move out of this, you're going to see them to start explore and experiment with new solutions. You'll see the light bulb going off. Oh, okay, this is going to be with us for a while. I've got to figure out a new plan of action. I've got to create a new process. I've got to get creative here. And then they're going to move back into decision-making mode where they're moving forward. They're taking action. They're coming to you with solutions to problems. And then it's on to integration. And integration is you see them doing the work necessary in this phase of the disaster. As a leader, when people move into experimentation, decision-making, integration, support them, cheer them on, and make sure that you're getting this support too from your team, from your manager, so that you're not staying in the frustration, confusion, depression zone, but instead you're also moving forward despite the uncertainty. So this is where making decisions in the face of uncertainty is really important, because this is the action that will propel you and your team out of the denial, frustration, depression zone, right? So if you picture the change curve, frustration and depression are towards the bottom of the change curve. Experimentation, decision-making, and integration is the upswing of the change curve. Every single person goes through this just at different speeds. And sometimes they're going to revert on you. So you're going to catch them having a bad day and they're really frustrated with what's happening with the business or with the team because of COVID-19. And they've just slid back a little bit. So support them, be empathetic, listen, and help them problem solve their way out of it. Don't solve their problems for them. Help them problem solve for what they have going on so they can move past it and back into a more powerful posture, which is decision making and integrating the change into their life. I was on a coaching call with a group of COOs the other day, and one person said, the weak are getting weaker and the strong are getting stronger. And she didn't mean it in any kind of way of referring to Darwin. What she meant was the people who were high performers, they're shining like rock stars. They are figuring out how to move forward. They're keeping themselves in a healthy state of mind so that they can stay on the upswing of that change curve. But the folks who were low performers before the pandemic are now even lower performers. You can see the stress response is keeping them in a place of frustration and confusion and depression. You can see them stop being creative. You can see them adding drama to the organization. And what's going to happen right now is, as a leader who is seeing the high performers really power through and make sure that they fight for their jobs and fight for their company and fight for their customers, you need to support them in actually taking a break right now. Support them in taking a day off because they're going to want to power through. Now, of course, reward their awesome behavior, reward the results that they're probably getting for your company, reward them for being loyal. Those are all amazing things. But you also need to remember that you need to help them support their own mental health. So accessing EAP services, think about having a coach come on campus and just support your people with some on-demand coaching for a little bit of emotional relief to the overwhelm that folks are going through. Make sure that you're offering more days off, or, as a reward, a couple extra days of PTO, whatever would fit in your culture there. But make sure that you're supporting them and not just powering through. Because in disaster response, when you're in that emergency crisis response, you do have to power through in some ways. You're running on adrenaline. You're making sure that you're just keeping the lights on for the company. That's what has to happen. But once we're in disaster recovery, we can move at a closer to normal pace. But our high performers are going to want to keep sprinting through the recovery phase. And so that means that they're running on adrenaline when they really need to relax, take some respite for their mind and their body so that they can stay with it through the marathon. Because the recovery, the mitigation, and the preparedness is about the marathon. And they have to be fueled up mentally and physically and spiritually. In order to do that, they probably need your support in doing that because they don't want to quit. They're going to grab this COVID-19 thing by the horns and they're going to win. They're going to take it down. The intent is awesome. The energy needs to take a break. Now, you're low performers. You are probably going to find yourself getting even more annoyed with the people who aren't pulling their weight. If you're like some of my leaders, you voluntarily took a pay cut so that more people wouldn't have to lose their jobs. And then you're watching people, take naps at work, really slow down their productivity, really, not hold up their end of the bargain for the team. You have every right to be pissed. Totally get it. But these lower performers also need support because they don't quite have the resiliency or emotional health that maybe your high performers do, or they have a different stress response. There's a variety of stress responses coming into play here. I don't want to mitigate that, but they need support in a different kind of way. They need to access EAP so they can learn how to step up their game. They might need that coach, coach on campus to help them figure out why, when stress happens, do you start underperforming? What's going on there? Because we need everyone at 100% right now, and you're at 65%. That is unacceptable. So they need a different level of support. They need support in knowing that they can step up their game, or they need support in transitioning out if they're not going to get on board. And that could be to a different role with lower level responsibilities. That could be out of the organization entirely. I'm not trying to suggest that you necessarily terminate their employment with you, but your company and the team deserve people who are operating at a high caliber now more than ever. And you, as a leader, have the responsibility to make sure all performers are operating at high level, or at least an acceptable level, and pulling their weight. Based on my business research, every employee should be bringing in value to the company of 4 to 5 times their salary. And so and of course, this isn't all completely measurable, but if you don't have a sense that people are able to bring in at least 3 to 4 times their salary right now, they need resources to make that happen. And I also want you to think about the generational components that are at play here too, right? We talked about younger baby boomers, older Gen Xers. You've been through this business cycle before. It wasn't necessarily caused by a global pandemic, but you've been through a business cycle like this before, and you've reached the other side. And so you understand the marathon thinking that has to happen right now. And some other leaders may not have the resiliency yet because they haven't had these experiences. And so again, it's a teaching opportunity to help people move from low accountability to high accountability, so that everyone can work together as a team to pull their weight to make sure that your company is as successful as possible. Now, if you have folks, the underperformers, who are just wallowing around in steps 1, 2, and 3 of the change curve, which is denial, frustration, depression / confusion, get them help sooner rather than later. It could be training, it could be EAP services, it could be additional coaching from you. There's lots of ways to handle this, but them staying in a place of denial, frustration, and confusion is unacceptable, especially during disaster recovery, where we have to make sure your business emerges from this as successful as possible. All right, friend, that's what I have for you on this first inaugural episode of the Hot Mess Hotline, where I covered the 3 foundational tools that you need now to move through disaster recovery so that your business and your team are as successful as possible. In our next episode, we're going to cover the first 2 steps of John Kotter's 8 steps to leading and guiding change. And we're going to talk about how you can apply those in the real world and some real deal processes that you can use to make you a successful change leader. Here's my request of you, my friend. Subscribe wherever you're listening, share with another leader at work, and sign up for those weekly straightforward leadership tools at stephaniekrievins.com/blog. All these options, as well as how to get Kotter's book, are in the show notes. We'll talk soon.